Welcome to Life Happens, where Texans come to protect their legacy and prepare for the second half of life. Join your host, attorney Kim Hegwood of Your Legacy Legal Care, and our weekly guest as we navigate the challenges that emerge as life happens. Now here's your host, Kim Hegwood.
Good morning and welcome to Life Happens with me, Kim Hegwood, and our very special guest today is Katya De Luisa. Good morning.
Good morning, Kim. Thank you for inviting me to the show.
Well, I'm super excited. We're going to be talking basically a little bit about your book, The Journey Through the Infinite Mind, the Science and Spirituality of Dementia. And so I'm super excited because this is a little different take on dementia.
Yes, it is.
So let's give our listeners a little background. So you are what we call a dementia educator. And so how did you become a dementia educator?
Well, I've been living in Costa Rica for quite a few years, and I went to the United States for a couple of years to work. At the time I was developing therapy, art therapy for organizations, different types of organizations. And during my time living in Sarasota, Florida, I developed an art therapy for people with dementia in a small nursing home. They wanted an art activity that everybody could do. Well, I quickly learned not everybody can do anything when it comes to dementia. I mean, I'd have 10 people and I'd say, okay, pick up your paintbrush, and nobody responded. So eventually I developed a one-on-one program. This was very important. It was a one-on-one program that used pictures and words out of magazines that you would create a collage with a partner. In other words, it was a one-on-one program. And I started doing it all over the Sarasota, Bradenton, Venice area in Florida. After I partnered with the Alzheimer's Association, we discovered that through these choosing of these pictures and phrases, even the nonverbal people could communicate with a partner if there was a person next to them working with them. So I learned a lot about dementia directly from the people with dementia. And I learned more than most people because I could communicate with those who couldn't communicate.
Well, that's fascinating, and so we're going to talk some more about that for sure. But you don't live in the United States. You're in Costa Rica, correct?
Yes, I've been here for 45 years. If you take away the 4 years I was in the States, yeah.
I
came in 1980.
So I'm assuming, are you from Costa Rica?
No, I was from Florida,
Okay.
Lake Worth, Florida.
All right, just decided you need a lot warmer weather.
There's a lot of personal reasons as to why. One of them was political, but we won't go for that. And that was in 1980. So
yeah,
I just stayed. I'm here.
Good. And I know a lot of people that have moved down and everything, and they love it. They love it down there. So, but what about dementia in Costa Rica? I'm assuming you have it there. Is it different than what we have in the US that you find? And what are the differences?
You know, dementia is worldwide. It's worldwide. In some areas, it's less, like supposedly in Japan, it's less. But here in Costa Rica, we've been, with those that have been diagnosed with dementia, different types of dementia, through the Blanco Cervantes Geriatric Hospital, it's around 33,000. Now, we've only got a population in the whole country of a little over 4 million people. So that's quite a few. And because the medical services are much better now than they were in the past, people are living longer, but they're not living more healthy. In other words, aging does not necessarily, you live longer, but you're not necessarily healthier. And I think that's across the whole world. Here in Costa Rica, that 33,000, you could probably double that because that's diagnosed. Those are people who've been diagnosed with the problem. We have one area, our main area is our Central Valley, where the main population is. But then the rest of Costa Rica is very rural. And even though we have nationalized medicine here, we have clinics in all of these rural areas, we don't necessarily have medical personnel that are specialists in dementia. So we get a lot of people going in with their loved one with early dementia and them being diagnosed as just having old age memory loss and being sent home in the rural areas. So there is literally very, very little information on dementia in the rural areas. Even though everybody's got internet, they don't really seem to look it up. I mean, most people, when I was doing workshops in the States, I was always surprised at how many people knew so little about dementia, even though they were caring for someone with dementia. It's almost like they're afraid to learn anything more about it because they're so exhausted living with what they've got to deal with every day. Whereas the more you learn about dementia, the easier it becomes caring for someone with dementia. And also for those diagnosed, it helps to eliminate a lot of the stigma if you really understand what it's about and how it works. And that's what I do. I go into the rural areas and I speak, and I have a PowerPoint presentation on how your brain works and how dementia affects it. So they not only learn about dementia, they also learn about how their own brain functions and how it's affected when you do get a brain disorder.
So your dementia education features, memory loss, whether it's normal or dementia, and how to improve, brain function. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah, there's so many things that one can do as far as improving memory loss. I mean, a few years ago, I lost a child, one of my sons, and I was in a pretty severe depression for several months. And it caused early dementia symptoms, early memory loss, and bad decision making. And I was pretty scared because I didn't know if it was something beyond the depression. So I went and I got tested. And it turned out it was the depression. And now how I changed all that after I came out of the depression was I also discovered diet. I cannot stress the importance of having a diet that feeds your brain. You can do all the exercises you want and everything, but if you have a crappy diet, excuse the word, but crappy diet, you're going to have a brain that's not functioning well. If you don't get sleep, your brain doesn't function well. There's so much that has to do with just keeping your physiology functioning properly in order for your brain to function properly. And people kind of like to ignore that, especially in industrialized countries where junk food is just around the corner and on every corner, and everybody's working so hard, and so they just stop and get junk food, and that is deadly for your brain. Another thing that's deadly is stress. So you look at all of these factors: stress, lack of exercise, all of these factors that just keep a human physical system running properly. This is going to, I understand the rise in dementia. Another thing is processed foods. Our body was never meant to process all of these chemicals. Both our liver and kidneys see anything that's not natural going into our bodies as poison. So it's constantly filtering poison from food that we think is nourishing us. So I talk a lot about that also in my dementia education here, both with the caregiver and the person with dementia, because both people have to have a functioning physical system in order to have a healthy brain. And even a person with dementia, keeping them physically healthy helps to slow the dementia symptoms and make it easier to take care of them.
And so, well, I understand about the whole processed food stuff. I was reading an article about, in Europe, they don't let manufacturers, just the difference in Pop Tarts, of what we eat here and what they eat there, and the stuff and you're thinking, why does the FDA allow you to do that sort of thing if there are better alternatives, So anyway, it is scary though, but I digress. So in your book, you raised the question: are brains generated thoughts in the mind the same? And what does that mean?
All right, when I first started working with people with dementia, people who were supposedly not there anymore because they couldn't communicate, I started thinking about how are they communicating? What are they communicating with if they have a damaged brain? And I've always been a seeker of understanding consciousness. Human consciousness to me is my passion. I want to understand why we're here. What are we doing in this human form? And is there more? So my first question when I started working with groups of people with dementia and their companions was, if the brain is so damaged that they shouldn't be able to communicate, then who's communicating? I wanted to know, is there something more than just brain generated thoughts? Because the brain is basically I consider this to be my meat suit, and the brain is the operating system for my meat suit, but it is also composed of meat. So I thought to myself, well, who's the Katya that knows she's Katya, and who's the Katya that can, when I'm doing something, or say, for instance, I'm getting angry and there's a little voice that says, "Ooh, she's really angry. Who the heck is that?" in my head. So I really started doing as much research as I could into brain function, just normal brain function and abnormal brain function, consciousness, perception, and all of that. And it was really important because also including a lot of religious beliefs. I'm very spiritual, but I'm not religious. I don't have a dogma. And it just seemed to me that we're more than the meat suit, and that our consciousness, how much we're actually aware of, is more than just the functioning of the firing neurons in the brain. And so I kept with that. And in all of my workshops, I would ask the groups of people, is the mind more than just the brain firing? And I've never had anybody in my groups say no. The mind, there's always this little bit of truth. There's like universal truths, and the universal truths, we don't really argue them so much because we really feel this is true. This is what really is happening. And so the book goes into hoping that the reader starts to develop an understanding that there's more perception, there's more awareness in their loved one with dementia than what they're able to express, because their lack of being able to communicate, their behavior problems and so on is because of the brain's malfunctioning. But is there another person inside there, another awareness inside there that can't get out, that can't communicate with this outside world? And during the research that I've done, there's been several people who have recorded that during dementia, they watch themselves doing things that they can't stop. In other words, there's another part of them, like the other Katya that was watching me getting angry, who's watching them act out, and they can't stop. So there's like the brain creates this one person, and then there's this other person who I believe is their true essence. I believe that's the true essence of who we are as human beings, and that this is a temporary state, and that there is an eternal part to us, and that is consciously aware, regardless of whether we're in a coma or whether we have dementia.
I think the brain is a magnificent, thing. I mean, you just think about what all it does and, and stuff. And, then you think, but if your subconscious is the other part of you, where is it? Is it in the brain? Is it somewhere else? So I can appreciate the thought, there. And so you also talk about the spirit that remains unscathed by dementia. Let's talk about that.
Okay. Because with the picture communication therapy, we were able to, not only myself, but the other volunteers who were working with people. I remember I did a workshop in Arkansas with in a nursing home where I was training the caregivers in the dementia unit. And when they started working with this process, they were so amazed how much they learned about the person who was a resident there. And they said, oh, I never even realized that Joan had all this in her, that all this stuff was going on with her. And I mean, there was a real communication. As soon as you have the communication with the person, then suddenly, oh, they must still be there. So to me, the spirit is always there. It's if you have a spirit, if you have another awareness that goes beyond the brain, in other words, it includes the brain, includes everything, but it goes beyond the brain, well, then that spirit is not damaged by dementia. The brain is damaged by dementia. The communication is damaged by dementia. Your perception of what this three-dimensional reality is gets damaged because the brain has to process all this. I put this in my book. I put a lot of how the brain processes reality and how when a person has dementia, how that reality shifts and changes. And that doesn't mean they're not there anymore. They may see a whole bunch of hallucinations, little people running across the floor. But what's interesting is with Lewy bodies, especially with Lewy bodies dementia, is they are normally often aware of the fact they're hallucinating. They're aware that these are hallucinations, but there's nothing they can do about them because the brain is damaged and it's just running its program. But who's that awareness during Lewy bodies that knows that those little people aren't real? Who knows that there's nothing they can do about them? So the spirit, I don't believe the spirit is ever damaged, because I do believe, and this is not a religious belief, although all religions seem to believe it, is that the spirit is eternal. It's eternal. This is a temporary pit stop for us.
And so it and I think if you are religious, then you already know, that Bible teaches us that yes, we will have eternal life somewhere else, or here, however, you do. So you call dementia progression a return to innocence. In what way?
Well, when I started working with the Alzheimer's Association in Sarasota, that was just after a few months after I discovered people were communicating with these pictures. We had to come up with a name for the program, because I started training all over the tri-state area, and eventually we did international conferences where I did presentations on this process. And I had to come up with a name for it. And the one thing I noticed when I started working with dementia, people with dementia, is, first of all, I knew nothing about dementia when I started at that little nursing home. Knew absolutely nothing about it. I'd never heard about it. I've been living in Central America for 20 years at the time. I didn't know what Alzheimer's was. And when people couldn't pick up their paintbrush, one of the staff came in and said, oh, most of these people have Alzheimer's. They will never be able to do art. So my first question was, what's Alzheimer's? So I didn't want anybody to tell me anything. I just spent hours and hours of unpaid hours in the nursing home with the residents, just observing and interacting and trying to communicate. And then I got videos out of the library, because I'm a visual learner. I actually learn more from a 2-hour video, than I would learn from volumes on the subject. And one thing I noticed was that, especially they reminded me of Down syndrome at some point as they start to progress, because I spent a lot of time in dementia units. And that to me, the Down syndrome children are always so innocent. There's an innocence about them. And that's what I started to discover with people with progressing dementia. There's an innocence about them when they're not in fear, and when they feel safe and loved, and especially feel safe. They need to feel safe. And when they feel that, there's just this innocent humanity that that just comes out of them in like a light. And I know that I used to get very upset with the system, the elder care system. I mean, I'm an idealist, and I feel things should be perfect. And the elder care system is a real, business, basically. Not necessarily for human beings. It could be cows or cats or dogs, whatever. And I would get so upset about that. And sometimes I would just go to one of the dementia units and I would sit for 2 hours with the residents, and I would feel fine by the time I left. And not because, oh, I didn't have dementia. No, because they had this love that would come out of them whenever they had felt they were being loved by somebody. So it was quite amazing. I would just get energized and feel cared about, even though they didn't know me. One example, sat next to this one lady with dementia, and she was kind of mumbling and so on. And I sat next to her, and suddenly she looked at me and she said, "Do you like me?" And I said, "Oh, I more than like you. I love you." And she said, "I love you too." And she started hugging me, and the two of us were like total strangers, but we were just sharing this unconditional, innocent love that human beings, this is what we really are. That's what I discovered. We are innocent, unconditional love, because that's what we are when we come in, and that's all we really take with us when we leave. So I called it Return to Innocence, because they were losing all of this, all of their lives and who they were and all. But those are just roles, and labels that we put on ourselves. What's really important in life is love, period.
Absolutely.
So that's why I called it Return to Innocence.
Awesome. Katya, this has been fantastic. So how do our listeners find you?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that part.
I said, I'm sorry. I said, this has been fantastic. How do our listeners find you?
Okay, they can go to my website. I will be doing online workshops this year. We're starting with that. We've been doing a lot of in-person stuff. My website's www.dementialearninginstitute.com, or they can go to my email and contact me directly, because I also do consulting online. So it's kdeluisa@yahoo.com, or they can contact me through WhatsApp at 506, which is our country code here, 87060496. So anyone is welcome to communicate with me and contact me. That's why this is my passion. This is what I love to do.
Yeah. Yeah, this is fantastic. Thanks so much for being on the show today, and we look forward to having you on again soon.
Thank you again, Kim, for inviting me. And bye to everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Life Happens with Kim Hegwood. Be sure to tune in every Thursday at 10 a.m. wherever you listen to your podcasts as we navigate through the challenges that emerge as life happens. The content of this podcast does not establish an attorney-client relationship or constitute attorney-client privilege, legal, medical, financial, or any other professional advice.